behind my face, so in case I turn red there. All right. So when we left off, we talked about the gonads, the testes, right? Sperm is being made, going through the epididymis, going up through the vas deferens, right? Through that spermatic cord into the back of the pelvic cavity there, around the bladder. It's going to travel along there. It's going to be joined up, by these secretions over there to make the semen, right? And then go out the spongy urethra, right? Whereas the females, right, they were going to spit it out. These guys caught them. They brought them in here, and then they moved through the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes into the uterus, right? Where there, if they were fertilized, they would implant
it's 19 hours.
Or if during the menstrual cycle, if they weren't fertilized, they'd be shed out right through the vagina. We left off kind of over in this region over here. Right? But that was all the internal kind of genitalia as well as the reproductive tracts over there, right? Right. So this last section from the uterus, right, it joins up with the vagina, right, which is really considered part of the reproductive tract, even though, it has the other functions of the, the copulatory organ, as they put it, right? So in this case, right, it's a highly distensible, and I think a key word is elastic over here, right? There's a lot of elastic tissue, that is a lot of elastic tissue, a lot of elastic fibers, right? Both within the muscle and the wall right there. You also have rugae in here, these folds right over here, which make it much more distensible, right? So that's the, the tube running down through here. The histology of it, you have a stratified squamous lining it. Again, you're going to go from the skin out over here, stratified squamous, dry, keratinized, to a stratified squamous, non-keratinized, wet, right? Just like any opening in the body, like any orifice in the body is like that, right? And for both of these, the lamina propria, making up that membrane right there, has a lot of elastic fibers in it. The smooth muscle layers around the side right here also have a lot of elastic fibers. And then I think the beginning part might be whatever the uterus is up here, and then it turns into an adventitia, right, as far as the outside right here. And then the other features, especially for the, what do you call the models right here, right? The uterus, remember that this is part is the cervix, and then but this part, starting with the vagina, is the fornix. And that's that cup-shaped area. Again, if you're familiar with diaphragms, that's where the diaphragm would go to prevent sperm going into the uterus and doing the damage there, right? That's the fornix. The other one is the hymen when present, right? In very young women, the neck could get broken, but there's a vascularized, elastic epithelial fold like lining the vaginal orifice here. So I'm going to go over here, just look at this histology part of it, right? The stratified squamous epithelia, right? So in this case, you have this stratified squamous underlined by the lamina propria over here. And one thing that during the histology test, right, you'll see something like this. This is the esophagus. That's also a stratified squamous. It's a little thicker. The other thing you'll notice about the esophagus is that down over here you have not only the muscularis mucosa, which is indicative of the digestive system, but also have these esophageal glands right over here, right? These glands which secrete mucus to make this moist over here, right? Vagina doesn't have those glands underneath right there. So if you see glands and stuff, you're in the esophagus. Right? But those are kind of look-alike organs. Most of the moistness, like the mucus layer that would make this moist, is coming from the two sources, from either the uterus, right, uterus secretions, or these cells right here, right? This is like a normal epithelial cell, right? So you have these basal cells, just like your skin, that are going to be constantly dividing, right? And then they'll move up, right? They don't die like your skin, they're still living, but then they're exfoliated, right? Just like any other epithelial, right? So you could say you have a new vagina every month, right? With this, you're remaking your skin all the time. And then the other part about it is there's glycogen storage, unlike most mucosal tissues. There's glycogen being made in these squamous cells, and they're being secreted out onto the surface here. What that does is provide a food source for commensal bacteria, which reside there, right? Just like everywhere in your body, we have bacteria all over your body. These bacteria take the glycogen and they make it into lactic acid, right? This is what accounts for the acidity, right, of the inside the vagina there. And this is going to prevent like yeast infections and stuff, which is one reason why, you know, if females are taking antibiotics sometimes and it kills these bacteria, they're more prone to these infections right there. Right, but that's just the lining of the wall right there. All right. So that is the last part really of the reproductive tract, right? Leading from fallopian tubes into the uterus. And then this would be like that last part of the reproductive, you know, I mean, the tract proper, right? And then you come to the opening over here, right? So this brings us into these perineal structures, otherwise known as the external genitalia over here, right? This will be the vulva for the most part of the females, and the penis. I guess the scrotum is also considered that too, but we already kind of covered that. All right, so the word perineal structures relates to this word perineum, right? That's in this rather undignified position right here, right? You can see this perineum, which starts from the pubic symphysis, goes backwards along the ischial ramus, right over here, and then it goes over to the anus over here, right? This forms this diamond shape, which is split into two sections, the urogenital triangle, and then the anal triangle on the posterior side right here, right? So this is referred to as the perineum over here. All right, so here's an interesting sort of thing, which all the studying of your internet searches on reproductive structures didn't teach you. Right? So this is about the homology of it, right? So you start off at this indifferent stage, right? You have these kind of, what do you call, androgynous sort of external parts to it, right? That are going to go on to form their specific structures right here. So you have this genital tubercle, and you don't have to know the names of this, but these are the embryonic structures, right? This urethral fold leading from it, and within the urethral groove here, and then you have what's called a labioscrotal swelling over here, right? And so for males, right, this genital tubercle is going to turn into the glans penis, right, and also grow an extension of that. For the female, it's going to turn into the glans clitoris, right? So these are what you call homologous structures. That genital tubercle, right, become the glans penis in the male, and the glans clitoris in the female. So what I was saying was these are the homologous structures over here, right? They're going to have the same embryological origin, and then they also are going to be similar in, not totally, but they have similar functions over there. They're going to have similar tissue organization, as we'll see. And then, you know, you could tell by the name, labioscrotal swelling, right? The labia majora on the outside is going to form the female, and the scrotum from the labioscrotal is going to form in the males right here, right? That's where the testes are going to descend. And then for this pink structure right here, this urethral fold and groove, right? For the female, those are going to become the labia minora, right, on the inside of what area is called the vestibule. And for the males, these are going to be actually enclosed, right, within the penis that's being formed, right? So here's the male, here's the female, right? They both start off with this urethral folds. And then for like the males, right, this little section over here is this, and then these kind of, the tissue kind of grows around it, so that this urethral fold here becomes internalized inside right here, right? So that's why you have the spongy urethra on the inside, whereas on the female, right, it just leads out to the opening over here, right? That'll be all, you know, so internally, those would be similar, but then you have this extra extension going here, and it's inside, the urethra is inside. right? So that grows inside, right? And then the penis extends over here, right? So the glans penis and the penis, right? That's forming from the same tissue growing down, growing around those urethral folds, right? Whereas the labia minor is going to be externally located over here, that tissue, right? So you can see what this was is inside over here, making up the spongy urethra, basically. Right, the scrotum, right, where the testes descend into, right, that area, and then the labia majora on the outside here. And I mentioned that, you know, sometimes the testes, right, during the descent, they kind of stop in the pelvic cavity, don't descend down into there, or maybe do it later, or maybe they have to do it operationally. But there are also more rarely occasions where the ovaries actually descend right down into the perineum over here, and then they end up over here, right, in the same place. So that's kind of interesting too. All right. Is that it? Penis. All right. So now we're going to start off over here, like looking at the internal tissue organization, right, of these, right? So for the penis, right, we have what we call the Lorena Bobbitt view over here, right? This is cut cross section over here to look at the inside structure over here. So these dorsally located, you have a paired corpora cavernosa. Each one is a corpus cavernosa. These two, what's called erectile tissue over here. And then ventrally speaking, where the urethra is running through, is the corpus spongiosum over here, right? So those are where, you know, the erectile tissue itself, right? And then this is where the urethra is running through. This is all covered, you know, this is the normal skin on the outside. And then inside you have the, you know, the tunica albuginea and this fibrous kind of partitions over here. All right, so last class, one of my classes, some of the more bold people asked, they asked me about the phenomena of the bent penis. So it turns out that if you guys are probably too young about this, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, I don't know if you remember that whole story, but basically she was asked how she could positively identify him. Right? She positively identified him because he had apparently, you know, some kind of bend, right? Rather than going straight out, it was bent. So that happens. I forgot the name of it, something syndrome, but that happens if there's some kind of damage during whatever you might be doing to damage this over here, right? Of the fibrous tissue, you get scar built up like on one side, and then it starts to kind of create this fold, right? Or bend there. So in case that ever comes up in your life, that's what's happening. Good, no questions. All right, so that is the inside over there. And then, you know, looking at what that means by this corpora cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum, what that tissue is basically a lot of blood vessels and sinuses, right? Connective tissue and smooth muscle inside here that under the stimulus, broadly defined, right? You get this is a parasympathetic kind of action, right? Where the nerves end up nitrous oxide being released over here, right? Which actually is a vasodilator, right? This is where Viagra acts on. It kind of promotes the formation of nitrous oxide. And that's why it does this action right here. But in any case, the blood vessels, right, open up, the smooth muscles relax, blood flows in here, right? And you get basically the rigidity comes from the hydrostatic pressure, kind of like a garden hose, right, will become, you know, stiff after the flow of water through it, right? So despite the name, right, there's no bone in this, right? It's all hydrostatic pressure in that erectile tissue. Now you know I got to turn off my camera for this. All right, so that is the erectile tissue, right, for the male, right? And then we're going to get into deeper and look, is there any kind of equivalent in the female? All right, so for these homologs, again, right, you want to look at the glans, penis, and the clitoris, at least the body of it, the stuff that's visible over here. You actually have a prepuce, that would be the foreskin in the male if visible. The female also has an equivalent kind of foreskin area, right? And then the scrotum, right? And of course, the labia minora is internal in the male right here, right? So for the female, we already had the vaginal opening over here, right? And that will lead into what is known collectively as the vulva, right? Which will be all the external female genitalia over here, right? The vulva. And that'll include the vestibule over here, which is the inside space containing the urethral and vaginal orifice. So here's the urethral opening, and then the vaginal opening is after, right? Surrounding, kind of making up the vestibule on the outside is that labia minora, right? So you're going from on the labia majora on the outside, that was like regular skin, like hairy skin. This goes into a mucous membrane over here, right? So this would be dry, this would be the wet kind of mucous membrane over here, right? And at the very most anterior end of it here, right, you have the clitoris, which you could see the tip of, right? The glans, clitoris on the outside, but there's also this internal structure inside over here, going around in between here and the pubic bone, right? And this layer of kind of more fatty tissue right in front of the pubic symphysis is called the mons pubis. One of the other teachers, he just wrote in an email that he accidentally wrote mom's pubis on his anatomy, on his test, and his students thought he did it on purpose. It was an accident. Don't even ask. All right, so it's the mons pubis. All right, so those are the vulva, right? And those structures here. Here's the labia majora on the outside, you know, the labia minor, again, that's going from a dry, like hairy skin and into a wet skin. Then you'd have the vaginal orifice, the urethral opening over here, and then the clitoris, right? And what I was saying was, if we look inside over here, right, you'll see that the labia minora underneath had this tissue over here, which is going to be equivalent to the corpus spongiosum, right? Which in the male is going to, remember, enclose the urethra, right? So you can remember that urethral kind of tissue over here. And then for the clitoris, right, this goes back inside here and then goes down to this tissue, which is comparable to the corpora cavernosa, right? So this is sort of what you're missing from the inside right here, right? That would be the tip. But then you have all this other internal structure, right, which is all basically erectile tissue, right? So it's going to have the same kind of blood flow, same nerves, same everything, same innervate, parasympathetic innervation, same action right here. So now when you look at the male over here, right, we didn't really look at this, but if you look at this, this is the corpus cavernosa over here, and it has the same kind of structure. This is called the crus, again, right, going down the pubic arch on this side. And then this part, this is called the bulb, or this is going to be the corpus spongiosum over here, which in this, you know, circles around the urethra on the inside over here, right? So when you look at it this way, you could start to see the much greater similarities between the two external genitalia on the inside here, right? So for your female, over here, right? Again, this would be the outside, and it's going down over here, right? And then this over here would be underneath the labia minora, equivalent to the corpus spongiosum of the male, right? And then for the male, right, you can see this similar structure, the crus leading into the corpus cavernosa, and then the bulb, or in this case, the corpus spongiosum, which encloses the urethra over here, you know, would be this structure over here, right? So those are all things that you didn't probably learn watching all the porn that you guys apparently watch, according to the internet, right? So this is, you know, the cartoon I have on there, like the cartoon penguin looking guy over here, right? That would be all the equivalent homologous structures over here, right? The glands coming out here, and then that corpora cavernosum, okay, on each side, and then the corpora spongiosum over here. And you also remember had that bulbourethral gland. This is going to be for lubrication during excitement over there for both the bulbourethral and the greater vestibule gland. And so once again, the innervation and the blood vessels, right? All those blood vessels going in and out are going to be very similar for both of those, as well as the innervation, right? The parasympathetic innervation is going to be very similar for both of these right here. And so if you do the cross section over here, you have the corpora cavernosa, you have the spongy urethra, but for the female, for the clitoris, right? If you did a cross section here, you'd have that corpora cavernosa tissue. Of course, you wouldn't have the urethra in this case, but it's going to be a very similar kind of structure, right? More similar than you would expect from this. All right, so that is, the internal structure, and that's just kind of more of a fun fact sort of stuff, right? But I also want to bring up, some more controversial in some areas, right? What you might have heard is like female circumcision. Remember, for the male circumcision, you're just cutting off the prepuce, right? That little bit of foreskin right here. There's different sorts of what they call female, kind of euphemistically called female circumcision. But this is why some people call it female genital mutilation, right? There's some where the clitoris is cut off, which would be equivalent to basically cutting off the head of the penis in the male, and then that's sewed up. Other ones remove not only the clitoris, but the labia minora, and then it's sewed up. This would be equivalent to basically cutting off most of the penis besides the head, right? And then there's other ones which remove everything and then even sew up the vaginal entrance right here. Right, so this is happening in certain countries and everything, but you may have heard of this controversy, and now you know the anatomy, and you could think of, you could tell people what the male equivalent would be if they want to argue with you about it. All right, so that's just my 2 cents in that. All right, so that leaves us with what? We already talked about pregnancy, right? The growth of the uterus, this insane growth of the uterus during pregnancy, right? And then for the last part, we're going to finish off, right, talking about that last sexual dimorphic structure, right, which males have breasts, but they don't have this expansion of the pectoral fat pad, right, which happens during puberty in response to estrogen, right? And then during pregnancy, right, this is happening over the pectoralis major, this pad of fat right here. And then during pregnancy, there's actually apocrine sweat glands in there that kind of turn into these mammary glands over here, right, along with these sort of suspensory ligaments, right, which make up, this is what is going to make the milk, during a certain stage of pregnancy. These are going to form, and then they're going to make the milk, these ducts are going to lead out into the nipple over here, right? So that would be the female structure. And you might ask yourself, why do males have nipples too, since they don't do any of that? And I can't answer that. Except to say, remember that the female is actually kind of the default position, right? The male, you need that XY chromosome to turn things off, and I guess it forgot to turn off the nipple or something. All right, so is that it? Oh, one last thing. This is the last thing you have to know, and this isn't even anything you actually have to know, but for those mammary glands, right, they're being formed, milk production is being promoted by the pituitary gland. Prolactin is forming it, and then oxytocin, the love hormone as they call it, right, that from the pituitary gland, hypothalamus, here's crying baby, right, it stimulates oxytocin, and then this is going to actually activate milk secretion, right? So that, we're just going to leave with that and say that is it.